Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
In a few days, we will celebrate Christmas and again hear the story of Mary and Joseph looking for a place in an inn for the baby Jesus to lay his head. Today we hear in the Song of Mary the beautiful words of the Magnificat. He has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. He has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has shown his mercy. On Thursday of this past week, I met with the executive director of Winter Sanctuary and the Sacramento Steps Forward program to learn of the way that you and I can, in the coming year, help to alleviate homelessness in our community. The executive director's first name is Tiffany. In preparation for our meeting, Tiffany had reviewed our parish website. Tiffany started our meeting by commenting on how amazing the people of St. Francis are in their outreach. Tiffany said, for a small congregation, we do truly amazing work. She said there are a lot of big congregations that she works with that don't do as much as we do. I knew this, our vestry knows this, and I just want to make sure that you know it and celebrate it. Our parish website speaks of our outreach. Our weekly prayers speak of our outreach. Our monthly town halls often feature speakers from among our outreach partners. Last Sunday, we had a speaker from Heifer International, one of our cherished charities. In January, we will welcome the Reverend Jocelyn Hughes, who will speak to us on the Lutheran Episcopal Volunteer Network, of which Megan is an intern with. In February, Tiffany from Winter Sanctuary will come to speak with us. And the rest of the year, we have some amazing people from among our 2015 and new 2016 outreach partners coming to talk to us as well. Tiffany saw all of this energy for our outreach on our parish website and in our newsletter. The vestry and I know there are, as wonderful as this joyful news is, a few more steps that we can take as a community. Gentle steps, slow steps, but important steps in the larger community. In addition to the great work we are doing through our financial contributions in our senior produce market, we have the opportunity to meet face-to-face the poor and needy of our neighborhoods. Yes, our dollars raise up the needy every day, just as the words of the Magnificat proclaim. But we need to be there like Jesus was in person. To live the words of the Magnificat, you and I, like Jesus, needs to lift up the lowly with our hands. Today, there are two aspects of the Magnificat I want to reflect on with you. I want to talk with you about the poor and the powerful on their thrones. Growing up in my Roman Catholic church in the Bronx, back in New York City, we always had a poor box in the back of our sanctuary, right where the clock is that Lynn pointed out to me today. Right back there was a little brass pour box that underneath it had a little bowl for holy water, so you bless yourself and then you put your pennies or your nickels or your dollar in there. I always thought when we did that, and my parents always encouraged us, never were we at church when we didn't put something in the poor box. I always thought that the poor are far away. They're not up the street or around the block or in our neighborhood. Even as a little boy, I thought the poor, they must be off in Africa or some foreign land I don't even know exists. Likewise, the powerful on their thrones in the Magnificat were also far away. They're the big empire leaders. They're the presidents of nations and prime ministers and ambassadors in the United Nations. So the Magnificat for me, beautiful prayer, beautiful sung and evensong liturgies around the world, but basically meaningless to me. But then I started to pray. And in my prayer, the Spirit asked, who are the poor among your neighbors, Joe? Where do you find them? And where are you on your throne? Tiffany said that many of us are one step away from homelessness. We had a long talk last week, and she taught me a lot about homelessness. I thought I knew a lot already, but not as much as Tiffany did. And I agreed with her on that point, that we're all, maybe not all, but a majority of Americans are one step away from homelessness. When I was an executive, I knew men and women who never saved money. I knew people with six-figure jobs who were bringing in $400,000 or $500,000 a year, who spent it all every year on their houses, on their cars, on restaurants every night, on all the joys of life. But they never prepared for their futures. If any of these people suddenly lost their job, they would be at high risk of being homeless. When I was a street priest in Reno, I more than a few times met people who had never been homeless before, but suddenly lost their jobs and did not have a safety net. So the poor and homeless are not unknown. Rather, they are literally our neighbors. And when I was a street priest working with members of Trinity Reno, people who were working with me out in the streets actually met their neighbors and said, I didn't know that you were living on the street. Tiffany reminded me again that homeless are not the good-for-nothing bums that I grew up thinking about, who cannot or will not get a job to carry their weight. Apart from the few who did not save properly and suddenly thrust from the compensated workforce, this was my learning from Tiffany. The vast majority are mentally ill. Growing up in the 70s, Governor Carey deinstitutionalized all the mentally ill, and apparently the same thing happened in California. So it's not just about losing a job, it's about people who are thoroughly dependent on society. A completely uncomfortable feeling for all of us. There's a way of hearing the Magnificat as a tug of war between the rich and the poor, but I don't think that God intends a tug of war between the rich and the poor. I think God wants to reconcile all people to God's self. In reconciling all people to himself, God needs to bring us closer to one another. Sometimes we have to be brought down off of our various thrones to see more clearly, love more dearly, and follow Jesus more nearly. In reading today's gospel, I wondered who among our neighbors are the poor, and who on their thrones need to be overthrown. Again, how do we think of those powerful on their thrones? Like when I was a little boy and saw the poor far away, so also with those on their thrones. I shared with Tiffany a story, and I don't use names in this story because most of you who are regular members will know and recognize the story of which I talk about. But for confidentiality purposes, I will not use names. I shared with Tiffany that my felt naivete about helping a neighbor of ours last year to go through detox, and the way it did not work the way I had envisioned and planned. I admitted not knowing what I was doing, short of just trying to do something good, to try to care for someone who is in tremendous need, actually in crises. I admitted to Tiffany knowing very little about recovery, and as I was going through it, realized how little I knew. And several of you taught me more. I felt like I let this person down. It really disturbed me last year. And I never really shared that fully with the vestry because I hadn't really claimed it myself either. It was really in the praying of the Magnificat that I began to see and feel my heart broken because I couldn't help in the way that you and I really wanted to. I told Tiffany with a sort of self-righteousness that I can muster up sometimes. I told Tiffany I learned not to pay for detox again unless the neighbor was ready. There was a gentle pause in our conversation. I can't wait for you to meet Tiffany. Tiffany's a beautiful person with a beautiful heart, has a tremendous gift to do this work. And she has a powerful story that I will not share with you, and I hope she will. Tiffany gently knocked me down from my throne of self-righteousness and self-pity. She explained that sometimes it takes several rounds before somebody becomes sober for good. She tried to encourage me and to encourage us as a congregation that we did not fail, nor did really our neighbor fail. Yes, she said, it takes the desire of the person, but desires that start well and falter are not failures. They're a path and a journey forward. It's not the end, it's just a process. She said that false starts need more time. False starts need people like you and me who are willing to understand and not worry about ourselves, but rather place our focus solely on those we are trying to raise up. And to do so, we have to be willing to encounter and to accept failure. That sense of felt failure that Tiffany said was not failure. But that feeling of failure, we have to be willing to accept, not punishing ourselves or the other person, that we don't condemn the other person. We have to exercise unconditional love. After our hour-long meeting, I felt raised up by Tiffany. I had a new outlook on my ministry, a new hopefulness about the congregation and its power to raise people up. I had a great curiosity over these last 3.5 years of who are our neighbors in the park across the street. I learned about the amazing work that Winter Sanctuary and Sacramento Steps Forward are doing in the River District and downtown over the last 3 years, actually the 3 years I've been here. Sacramento Steps Forward, there's more information on the website, on the parish website now, including a 10-minute video by the executive director of Sacramento Steps Forward. I encourage you to listen to it. This is a program where they have what they call navigators who go into the parks and other street locations and assess homeless people for housing. The most vulnerable are given an opportunity for permanent housing and full-service programs. Here's the way the program works. They go out, meet a person, and they have a survey tool and a ranking in the tool. And people are assigned points for different characteristics. And the example she gave to me was the young 25-year-old male who had a job and then went to Vegas and lost all his money would not be high on the list of vulnerability and therefore unlikely to be the first to be given housing. Compared to, in contrast to, the chronically ill woman in her late 50s who's been living on the street for several years never in trouble with the law. All her family has passed away, and she's the highest priority for a house, an apartment. I was energized by what I heard. Very soon, navigators will be going into Fair Oaks Park across the street, at my invitation, representing you, we as a congregation, so we may learn who is there and what housing opportunities and other programs might be offered to these men and women. I'm hopeful that changes our encounter with the park and with these people, and how people encounter St. Francis, that church across the street. What do they think of us? That they know us, and they know the love and the mercy in your hearts beyond your money, that this place stands for love and mercy. I never wanted to go in the park alone. I grew up in the Bronx. I know about what to be afraid of, so I'm a scaredy cat. And none of us are going in alone. We are working with competent people with access to resources. At the same time, the gap is closing between our congregation and the disenfranchised in the park. The potential for positive outcomes for the poor and the needy among us and for ourselves as a congregation are nothing short of extraordinary transformation, and embodies the Magnificat words. No longer is the Magnificat a domesticated prayer that means nothing. It means something. The poor, for me, Joe, is no longer in a faraway land, but rather our neighbors across the street in our park. Those on their thrones who need in some way to be taken down a notch are also closer to us too. I'm one of them. Maybe some of you are too. Maybe you know somebody on their throne who just needs to be shifted ever so slightly. The good news of the gospel is that the Lord is acting through the poor who are raised up and the powerful on their thrones that are brought down. In the rising up of some and the coming down of others, we meet Christ. The good news is that the Lord magnifies our souls and brings joy to our spirits through our encounter with raising up the poor. God bless you.